a single engine failure is more or less ruled out. If you come to dual engine failure, that is very, very remote, and so far we have not come across frequently that dual engine failure. Only in case of any bird hit, we get the dual engine failure. It cannot be due to bird strike, because if it is due to bird strike, then you will get some sort of arcing, sparking, and smoke. At the same time, both the engines will not encounter the bird strike at the same time. One of the reason which can cause that sort of a thrust loss, power loss, which prevented the aircraft from climbing, what I can think of is fuel contamination.
Sir, what do you think about this Ahmedabad plane crash incident, sir? From your experience, what you wanted to say to the public, sir?
Sir, this Ahmedabad plane crash was one of the most unfortunate incident in Indian recent history. The previous crash, whatever we had, were different. This Ahmedabad crash, that is Boeing Dreamliner, it's one of the most ultra-modern aircraft with all the safety precaution, navigation, and it is almost foolproof. But still, something went wrong, and then it crashed. So they are in the process of recovering the black box to get the actual information. It has got the CVR as well as the DFDR, and both of them are integrated, and they call it as a single unit in order to synchronize the data of CVR and FDR, because it will give a better picture. Whatever event has occurred, it will reflect in the cockpit as well as in the FDR. So we are in the process of getting the data, and looking at the wreckage, it looks like the aircraft is totally destroyed, and even the black box will undergo a very high temperature impact, whatever is there. But it is still shock-proof, heat-proof, whatever is there. The data, what is in-housed in a small container, will be intact. So the first thing what they have to do is to locate the FDR. They have to pull out the memory card from the FDR, mount it on a healthy unit, which can be replayed, and then you download the data to a computer to start your analysis. So that is the first point. And then similarly you get the data from the CVR, and you try to synchronize those two to see what is the conversation which has taken place, and then you try to correlate the root cause of this crash.
So, what are the major measures
Okay.
by airline companies, sir, on avoiding this kind of incidents, sir?
Normally, when we investigate any accident, we follow a certain procedure. It is called as process of elimination. That is, we take a very big blackboard and we try to write down all possible causes of the crash without leaving anything. Even if it is something unimaginable, we still take it. For example, if you say that there can be an alien abduction for MH370, we take it. Subsequently, we say that it is very remote, but we take everything. So, taking all the possible causes which can cause the crash, we write on a blackboard, and then we start the process of eliminating one after the other, which are very unlikely. So the crash can take place due to several reasons. It can be due to weather phenomena. So you are flying and suddenly you encounter some turbulence or severe thunderstorm, whatever is there, it can damage the aircraft. So that is due to natural phenomena. Or you can have due to something called as a wind shear. There is a microburst when the packet of air comes down and hits the ground, and it gets dispersed in all the direction. And particularly if it happens on the runway and at the time when the aircraft is landing, first the aircraft will encounter a head wind because of the downburst, and the aircraft will tend to pitch up. The pilot will try to correct the course of action by bringing it down. And once it passes through the center of the impact of downburst, it becomes a tailwind. Then he is going to suddenly lose the speed and the aircraft will stall and crash. That is one of the weather-based phenomena. So like that, you have got other man-made disaster where the things can go wrong either from pilot and or maintenance engineer or whatever is there. So that is man-made. Similarly, we have got many other reasons for the crash. So the last one, what I would like to stress is sabotage. It is something very, very serious and it is difficult to predict. So coming back to this Ahmedabad plane crash, whatever little bit of information we have seen on the TV, on the media, let us try to draw some inference before we get the actual data. The system shows that the aircraft climbed to a height of 625 feet before it started descending. So, if the aircraft is airborne, it means that things are somewhat okay. But when you look at the rudder component of the aircraft, it looks very stable. When the aircraft reached 625 feet and it started descending, it looked as though it has lost its thrust or the power. Now, the power loss can be mainly due to loss of engine. If there is an engine failure, then obviously the thrust what is generated is reduced a lot. For engine failure, which is quite rare, it is not something common, but it is very, very rare. If there is an engine failure, then there is a large amount of thrust asymmetry which will try to veer off the engine aircraft in the particular direction, which is compensated with your rudder. But here we find that the rudder is almost standstill. There is no movement of rudder. So a single engine failure is more or less ruled out. Now, if you come to dual engine failure, that is very, very remote and so far we have not come across frequently that dual engine failure. Only in case of any bird hit, we get the dual engine failure. For example, in US, the aircraft, the A320 which landed in river, it was mainly due to the dual engine failure of the bird strike. Now here let us see what could have happened. The runway of the aircraft, Ahmedabad airport is 11,500 feet, which is really very long for any aircraft to take off. And normally when the aircraft takes off, it will lift off at something like half the runway or slightly at 60% of the runway length. If the aircraft had taken off and it was airborne at 7,000 feet, by the time it covers another 4,000 feet, it would have climbed a lot of distance. But here it looks as though when the aircraft was crossing the boundary of the perimeter of the airport, it was hardly at 620 feet. It means the aircraft is unable to generate the required lift for climb. And then we find that the landing gear is down, it is not retracted. The normal practice is the person who is monitoring the aircraft, he will give the call out. He will say 100 knots to alert the pilot. And then you have got next V1, that is the decision speed. The pilot has to take the decision whether to continue with the takeoff or to reject before V1. And then you have got the next speed as VR. It's called as a V rotate. So the pilot will rotate the aircraft and the aircraft is airborne. Subsequently, the first officer will say positive climb, gear up. So the gear is retracted when the aircraft reaches around 30-35 feet. And then you have got a speed called as a V2 speed. The aircraft should have climbed should attain a speed of whatever is the V2 speed. By the time the aircraft climbs 35 feet, that will ensure that the aircraft is airborne and has got sufficient power and speed to climb and to continue even in case of an engine failure. But here we find that the landing gear is down. It is not brought up. So what could have been the reason for not bringing the landing gear up? There may be some problem with the thrust because the aircraft was not climbing. Now, if we look into the possibility of both the engines malfunctioning, which is very, very remote, it cannot be due to bird strike. Because if it is due to bird strike, then you will get some sort of arcing, sparking and smoke. At the same time, both the engines will not encounter the bird strike at the same time. There will be a small time lag between the first engine failure and the second engine failure. Meanwhile, the aircraft will try to veer off in one direction and you will find some rudder movement. But here there was no rudder movement. So it looks as though both the engines were behaving in a very same way, without any time difference, without any, there was no discrimination. So one of the reason which can cause that sort of a thrust loss, power loss, which prevented the aircraft from climbing, what I can think of is fuel contamination. That is one of my strong point for both the engines stalling simultaneously and losing the power, because the same fuel goes to both the engines. So if the fuel is contaminated, both the engines will behave in the same way, and the thrust what is generated is less. The aircraft could not sustain that climb rate, and then it could not even sustain the level flight. The aircraft descended and it fell because it contained more than 35 tons of fuel to reach London. It was like a fireball. The moment it crashed, there was a big, huge fireball, and then there was a lot of smoke, and the aircraft fell in on a medical hostel, what they call it as, and there are a lot of casualties on that. So the most probable cause, what I feel, is due to fuel contamination, and the other things will be reflected once we get the data from DFDR, and we get all the parameters about the thrust generated, RPM, fuel flow, how much of fuel is carried. Those parameters will show up, EGT, all the autopilot engage, the command given to retract the, whatever command he has given, that will reflect, and also the CVR will tell the coordination between the captain and the first officer, how they acted and how they handled the situation. Can you please repeat the question? The main safety procedure what has to be followed is assigned to crew member, to pilot, to passenger. Everything is different. And then we cannot have a single guideline for all the cases. It is like giving medicine. So when you take medicine, it depends on what is that ailment you have got. So based on the ailment, you are going to get the medicine. So every case is unique, and it has to be looked deep into that one. So we cannot have a general guideline. We can have certain minimum guidelines, but we cannot have a magic stick which will cure everything. So it is for the management and for the other airport authority to implement whatever the safety regulations based on the past experience. And every case is totally unique, totally different, and every crash will give you some new lesson, and it will give you something how to overcome. Just to take a very simple example, one of the Boeing 777 aircraft, which long back, almost 10 years back, which was landing at Heathrow Airport, he was in the idle descent, and he was the glide path. The final approach, when he tried to correct his flight path by giving some power to the aircraft, the engine did not respond. Means there was a fuel starvation of the engine. Whatever power he is giving, absolutely, it is like pressing a throttle, your car is not accelerating. So that was the situation. And when they analyzed and when they decoded, they found that there was a lot of froth formation in the fuel tube. And when thrust was given, that froth formed a ice layer in the heat exchanger, and then it prevented the fuel flow. And that resulted into a short landing. It landed much before the runway. The aircraft was slightly damaged. There was no fatality. But once they realized the problem, they immediately changed the heat exchanger of all the aircraft, and they made it in the form of a straw with a different altitude, different height, so that even if some of the heat exchanger hexagon holes are blocked, still you will have certain other holes from where the fuel can flow and it can heat up the engine. So like that, based on the experience, every experience will give you, every accident will give you something new to improvise the system. So it is not something unique. You cannot have if there is a mid-air explosion due to some electric spark in the fuel tank. There was a case when there was a fuel tank exploded because of some small transducer electric spark. Then they said that we have to see to it that the air which is supersaturated in the wing should be removed. So what they did was they filled that one with nitrogen, because nitrogen is an inert gas. So even if there is a small spark, it's not going to ignite just like your supersaturated air. So that gave a very good lesson for them. Similarly, Bangalore crash also gave a lot of information to them, how to design the window, how to design the, how much to keep the idle this power, 40%, 60%, whatever. Every accident will come out with some new ideas which helps them in improvising the safety. But if you are really very smart, then you should be able to predict certain failure in advance, and you should try to take a remedial action before it culminates into a crash. So the expertise will tell you what are the, it is like an iceberg floating in a sea. What you see is the tip of the iceberg. That is the problem. But there are a lot of other problems which is hidden inside the water, which is not seen. So only when you expose that iceberg by lowering the water, you will be able to indicate what are the problems and how to overcome. So it is just evolution, continuously improvising. There is no beginning, there is no end. You have to continue to improvise the system. So that's all. Every case is unique, and you have to see to it that things are, the data of the previous crash or incident is made use of to improvise, it doesn't occur again.